the dust devil that swirled through the center of Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory on that scorching September afternoon in 1891, carried with it more than just dirt and dried prairie grass. It carried the scent of change that would alter two lives forever. Florence Daniels stood at the window of the one-room schoolhouse, watching the miniature tornado dance across the rutted Main Street. Her chalk-dusted fingers pressed against the warm glass as she contemplated the emptiness that had settled in her chest since arriving in this frontier town 3 months prior. She turned back to face the empty classroom, the rows of mismatched desks and benches waiting silently for Monday morning when her students would return from helping their families with the autumn harvest. The chalkboard behind her simple wooden desk bore the remnants of Friday's arithmetic lesson, numbers and equations she had painstakingly written out to help the children understand division. Florence picked up the felt eraser, its wooden handle smooth from years of use, and began methodically wiping away the white marks, creating clouds of dust that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Her boarding room at Mrs. Patterson's house was stifling in the heat, and Florence had taken to spending her weekend afternoons at the schoolhouse where the cross breeze through the open windows offered some relief. At 23 years old, she had left her family's comfortable home in St. Louis to answer the call for educated teachers willing to civilize the territories, much to her mother's horror and her father's resigned disappointment. They had expected her to marry Robert Henderson, the banker's son who had courted her with all the enthusiasm of a man selecting livestock, and she had shocked them all by refusing his proposal and accepting the teaching position instead. The chalkboard now clean, Florence gathered her shawl and reticule, preparing to return to her boarding room for supper. She stepped out into the harsh sunlight, locking the schoolhouse door behind her with the heavy iron key the school board had entrusted to her care. The town was quiet in the weekend afternoon, most folks either resting indoors or attending to chores that could not wait. She did not notice the figure watching her from across the street, a tall man in dusty trail clothes who had been working up his courage for the better part of an hour. Nathan Lewis had never considered himself a coward. At 26, he had survived cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, had faced down rustlers and stampedes, and had even stared down a grizzly bear once in Colorado Territory. But the sight of Florence Daniels walking back toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house made his mouth go dry, and his heart hammer in his chest like a green kid's first time in a saloon fight. He had been watching her for weeks now, ever since he had taken the job as foreman at the Triple Bar Ranch just outside of town, finding excuses to ride into Kingfisher more often than necessary. He had first seen her at the general store, her arms full of primers and slates she was purchasing for students whose families could not afford them. She had been arguing gently with Mr. Thornton about extending credit, promising to pay from her own modest salary, and Nathan had found himself stepping forward to cover the cost before his brain had fully engaged with what his heart was doing. She had turned those remarkable green eyes on him, surprise and gratitude mixing with something that might have been suspicion, and thanked him with a formality that suggested she was not accustomed to accepting charity. Since then, he had manufactured reasons to encounter her. He volunteered to repair the schoolhouse steps when Mrs. Patterson mentioned they were loose. He made sure to be at the post office when the afternoon stage came in, knowing she often collected mail for the students whose families lived too far out to come to town regularly. He attended church services for the first time in years, sitting in the back pew where he could watch the sunlight play in her dark hair as she sat with perfect posture in the third row. But speaking to her, beyond basic pleasantries, had proven beyond his capabilities. Nathan could negotiate with cattle buyers, direct a crew of rough cowboys, and hold his own in any situation the frontier could throw at him. Yet the thought of telling Florence Daniels that he found her beautiful, intelligent, and utterly captivating left him tongue-tied and fumbling. His friend Billy Turner had finally taken pity on him the night before at the saloon, nursing a beer while Nathan stared morosely into his own drink. Billy worked at the livery stable and had a wife and 3 children who adored him, which in Nathan's current estimation made him an expert on romance. "You got to just tell her straight out," Billy had advised, signaling the bartender for another round. "Women appreciate honesty. My Martha says the worst thing a man can do is dance around his intentions. I cannot just walk up to a respectable schoolteacher and announce my intentions," Nathan had protested. "She would think me mad or inappropriate or both. Then do something romantic. Something that shows her you have been paying attention and that you respect her position." Billy had leaned back in his chair, warming to his subject. What does she like? What matters to her? Nathan had thought about that long into the night, lying on his bunk at the ranch house while the other hands snored around him. Florence loved teaching. That much was obvious from the way she spoke about her students at church socials. She spent her own money on supplies and stayed late helping the slower children catch up. She treated every child with the same patient kindness, whether they were the banker's daughter or the half-breed son of a Cheyenne woman and a trapper. And then, as dawn had broken over the Oklahoma plains, Nathan had remembered the schoolhouse. She spent her Saturday afternoons there alone, preparing lessons and organizing materials. The location was respectable, public enough that his presence would not compromise her reputation, but private enough for him to finally speak his heart. The plan had formed fully in his mind as he saddled his horse and told the ranch boss he was riding into town for supplies. Now, watching Florence disappear down the dusty street, Nathan checked his pocket watch. She typically stayed at the schoolhouse for 2 or 3 hours. If he waited a bit, and then went inside, if he could find the words he had been practicing all morning, maybe he could finally tell her what had been building in his chest for weeks. He crossed the street with purposeful strides, his boots echoing on the wooden boardwalk. The schoolhouse door was locked, but Nathan had learned from repairing the steps that the back window, the one behind Florence's desk, did not quite latch properly. He felt only a small twinge of guilt as he raised the sash and climbed through. This was not breaking in, not really. He had good intentions. The schoolhouse was warm and quiet, smelling of chalk dust, wood polish, and the faint scent of lavender that he had come to associate with Florence. The chalkboard stretched across the front wall, freshly cleaned and waiting for Monday's lessons. Nathan stood before it, pulling a piece of chalk from the tray, and stared at the blank dark surface. He had been rehearsing speeches for weeks. He had imagined himself eloquent, poetic even, finding words that would express the depth of what he felt when he saw her smile at a child's accomplishment, or heard her laugh at something Mrs. Patterson said at church. But standing here now with the chalk in his work-roughened hand, all those pretty speeches evaporated like morning dew. Nathan wrote slowly, carefully, his letters uneven but legible. "Will you marry me?" He stepped back, staring at the 4 words that represented everything he hoped for and feared. Was it too bold, too presumptuous? They had barely spoken beyond pleasantries. She knew his name, knew he worked at the Triple Bar, probably knew he had been making a fool of himself trailing after her like a lovesick pup. But did she know the contents of his heart? The rational part of his brain was screaming that this was madness. A woman like Florence Daniels, educated and refined, from a good family in St. Louis, could not possibly want a cowboy with calloused hands and limited prospects. She had probably left behind suitors far more suitable than him. She deserved someone who could quote poetry and discuss literature, not a man whose primary skills involved roping cattle and breaking horses. But the other part of him, the part that had watched her place her hand on young Tommy Miller's shoulder and tell him he was brilliant for finally mastering his times tables, the part that had seen her stand up to Jacob Richardson when he had drunkenly suggested the schoolhouse, was a waste of money that could be better spent on a new saloon. That part knew she was worth the risk of rejection and humiliation. Nathan set the chalk back in the tray, his hand trembling slightly. He could wait here, face her when she returned on Monday, watch her read those words and see her response. But cowardice crept in, the fear of seeing disappointment or worse, pity in those green eyes. He moved toward the back window, then stopped. No, Billy was right. Women appreciated honesty and directness. If he was brave enough to write the words, he needed to be brave enough to face her response. Nathan lowered himself into one of the student desks in the back row, his long legs cramped in the small space, and prepared to wait. The afternoon shadows were lengthening across the floor when he heard the key in the lock. His heart, which had been maintaining a nervous gallop for the past hour, now threatened to hammer its way out of his chest entirely. The door opened and Florence stepped inside, humming something soft and melodic under her breath. She moved to her desk, setting down a basket that smelled of fresh bread, probably from the bakery. She was bringing food to prepare for the week, he realized, meals she would eat at her desk while working late. The dedication touched him even as his mouth went completely dry. Florence turned toward the chalkboard, probably planning to write out Monday's lessons, and froze. Nathan watched her body go rigid, watched her hand rise slowly to her throat. She stepped closer to the board, reading the words again as if they might change or disappear. Who wrote this? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet schoolhouse, Nathan heard every syllable clearly. He stood up from the desk, the scrape of wood on wood making her spin around with a gasp. Her hand went to her chest and color flooded her face. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the length of the schoolhouse. "I did," Nathan managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "I wrote it. Miss Daniels, I know this is forward and improper, and you probably think I have lost my mind, but I could not find another way to tell you." Florence's eyes were wide, her breathing rapid. She looked from him to the chalkboard and back again. "Mr. Lewis, I do not understand. We have barely spoken. This is highly irregular. I know." He took a step forward, then stopped, not wanting to crowd her or make her feel threatened. "I know I should have courted you properly, should have asked permission to call on you, should have done 100 things differently. But I am not good with words, Miss Daniels. I am just a cowboy who can rope a steer and sit a bronc and not much else. But these past weeks, watching you with your students, seeing the way you care for this whole town even when folks do not appreciate it properly, I have found myself thinking about you every moment I am not occupied with work, and quite a few moments when I should be occupied with work." Florence's hand was still pressed to her chest, her expression unreadable. "You climbed through my window to write a marriage proposal on my chalkboard." When she put it that way, the whole plan sounded insane. Nathan felt heat climb up his neck. The door was locked. "And yes, I realize that sounds like the action of a madman. If you want me to leave, I will go right now and never bother you again. But if there is even a chance that you might consider it, that you might give me the opportunity to prove myself worthy of your attention, I would be the happiest man in Oklahoma territory." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of wind rattling the windows and the distant bark of a dog somewhere in town. Florence's expression shifted from shock to something Nathan could not quite identify. She moved to her desk and slowly lowered herself into her chair, her eyes never leaving his face. "Mr. Lewis, Nathan, I do not know what to say." Her voice was soft, uncertain in a way he had never heard from her before. "I am flattered, truly, but marriage is a serious proposition. It is not something to be decided on a whim based on a few weeks of observation. I know that." Nathan moved down the aisle between the desks, stopping a respectful distance from her. "I am not asking you to answer right now. I know I have gone about this all wrong. But I wanted you to know, needed you to know, that my intentions are serious and honorable. I would like permission to court you properly, if you would allow it." Florence looked at him for a long moment, and Nathan found himself cataloging everything about her in that instant. The way the late afternoon sun caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, the slight upturn of her nose that kept her beauty from being too severe, the intelligence that shone from her eyes even when she was clearly flustered, the graceful line of her neck above the high collar of her practical gray dress. "Why me?" she asked finally. "There are other unmarried women in Kingfisher. Younger women, women who grew up in the territories and understand this life. Why would you choose a city girl who cannot tell the difference between a palomino and a paint horse? Because you stood up to Jacob Richardson when he was drunk and belligerent, even though you were frightened. Because you spent your own wages on supplies for children whose names you did not yet know. Because you smile like the sun breaking through storm clouds when one of your students finally understands a difficult concept." Nathan realized his hands were clenched at his sides and consciously relaxed them. "Because when I imagine my future, I cannot picture it without you in it, and that terrifies me more than anything I have ever faced." Florence's eyes glistened, and she blinked rapidly. "That is either the most romantic or most reckless thing anyone has ever said to me, and I cannot decide which." "Can it be both?" Nathan ventured a small smile. "I have been told I have a talent for romantic recklessness." A laugh escaped her, surprised and genuine, and the sound of it made Nathan's heart soar. "I think you have been misled about your lack of way with words, Mr. Lewis. You have just said more meaningful things in 5 minutes than Robert Henderson managed in 6 months of courtship." Robert Henderson. Nathan felt an irrational surge of jealousy toward this unknown man. "The banker's son my parents expected me to marry. He proposed to me before I left St. Louis, and when I refused him, my mother did not speak to me for a week." Florence stood from her desk, moving to stand before the chalkboard and the chalk-written proposal. "I came here to escape that life, that expectation of what a woman should be and want. I wanted to be useful, to make a difference, to be more than just some man's decorative wife managing his household and bearing his children." "I would never want to cage you," Nathan said urgently. "Your teaching, the difference you make here, that is part of who you are. I would not ask you to give that up. My mother taught me that a woman is not property to be owned but a partner to be respected. She ran our ranch after my father died, made it profitable, earned the respect of every hand who worked for her. She taught me that a strong woman is not a threat to a real man but the greatest blessing he could receive." Florence turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. She passed 2 years ago, but I still hear her voice sometimes, usually when I am about to do something foolish." Nathan managed a small smile. "She would probably have choice words about my method today, but I think she would approve of my choice." "I need time," Florence said after a moment. "This is all very sudden and I need to think clearly, but I am not saying no. I am saying that if you truly want to court me to give us both the chance to know each other properly, then I am willing to consider it. Hope flared bright in Nathan's chest. Truly, you would allow me to call on you. On certain conditions. Florence lifted her chin, and Nathan recognized the same resolve she showed when dealing with difficult school board members. First, you will do this properly. You will speak with Mrs. Patterson, as she stands in place of my family here, and gain her permission to call on me. Second, you will not climb through any more windows. Use the door like a civilized person. Third, we will take this slowly. I will not be rushed into any decision, regardless of how romantic your chalkboard declarations might be. Agreed, all of it. Nathan felt like whooping with joy but restrained himself. Mrs. Patterson is a reasonable woman. I believe I can win her approval. She has been trying to marry me off to her nephew for the past month, so you may face some resistance, Florence warned, but her eyes held a glimmer of amusement. He is a telegraph operator in Oklahoma City, apparently quite well established. Then I shall have to prove myself superior to a telegraph operator, Nathan said, with more confidence than he felt. How does one compete with a man who can send messages across vast distances? Perhaps by being present rather than distant. Florence moved back to her desk and began unpacking the basket she had brought. I brought bread and cheese for my supper while I work on lesson plans. Would you care to join me, or would that be too improper given our current undefined status? Nathan glanced at the windows. They were visible from the street, and while the sun was setting, there was still enough traffic that their presence together would be noted but not scandalous, particularly with the door standing open. I would be honored to share your supper if you are certain. They ate in companionable near silence, the initial tension giving way to something more comfortable. Florence told him about her journey from St. Louis, the terror and excitement of traveling west by train, and then stage. Nathan shared stories of his years working cattle drives, editing out the more dangerous or unsavory details. He wanted her to understand his life but not frighten her away from it. You miss it? Florence asked, breaking off a piece of cheese. The drives, the travel, the adventure of it all. Nathan considered the question carefully. Parts of it. I miss the freedom of the open range, the satisfaction of bringing a herd through safely. But I do not miss the danger, the uncertainty, never knowing if you will make it to the next town. I took the foreman position at the Triple Bar because I wanted to put down roots, build something lasting. I am tired of drifting. I understand that feeling. Florence gazed out the window at the darkening street. Though I suppose it is strange for me to say that, having just uprooted my entire life to come here. Not strange at all. Sometimes we have to leave home to find where we truly belong. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Florence looked away first, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. You should probably go before it gets fully dark. People will talk if you stay too late. Let them talk, Nathan said, then immediately shook his head. No, you are right. I do not want to damage your reputation. But may I walk you back to Mrs. Patterson's? It is on my way. Your way to where? Florence asked with a raised eyebrow. The ranch is in the opposite direction. My way to wherever you are going, Nathan replied, surprising himself with the ease of the words. Perhaps he was better at this romance business than he thought. Florence laughed, the sound warming the cooling evening air. Very well, Mr. Lewis. You may escort me home, but you will wait outside while I speak with Mrs. Patterson about your intentions. Of course, Miss Daniels. They gathered her things and stepped out into the September evening. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink, the last rays of sun painting the scattered clouds in shades of fire. Nathan offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Florence took it. The contact, even through layers of fabric, sent warmth spreading through his chest. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, nodding to the few people they passed. Nathan could feel the curious stares, knew that by morning the entire town would be speculating about the schoolteacher and the cowboy foreman walking arm in arm through the evening. He found he did not care. Let them talk. He was walking with the woman he intended to marry, and that was worth any amount of gossip. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a well-maintained two-story structure at the edge of town, painted white with green shutters and a wide front porch. The proprietress herself was sitting in a rocking chair on that porch, snapping green beans into a bowl, and her eyebrows rose dramatically as she caught sight of them approaching. "Well now," she said, setting aside her bowl and standing, "this is an interesting development. Good evening, Mrs. Patterson," Florence said, releasing Nathan's arm with what might have been reluctance. "I wonder if I might speak with you privately for a moment. I expect you had better." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes fixed on Nathan. "Mr. Lewis, you can wait out here. There is another chair if you have a mind to sit." Florence disappeared inside with Mrs. Patterson, and Nathan lowered himself into the indicated chair, his hat balanced on his knee. Through the open window, he could hear the murmur of voices but could not make out the words. He tried not to imagine the worst, tried not to picture Mrs. Patterson forbidding Florence from seeing him. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The last light faded from the sky, and the first stars began to appear. Nathan was beginning to seriously worry when the door finally opened and Mrs. Patterson emerged alone. "Stand up, young man," she commanded, and Nathan quickly obeyed. She circled him slowly, looking him up and down like she was evaluating a horse at auction. "Florence tells me you have declared your intentions toward her." "Yes, madam. Honorable intentions. I want to court her properly, with your permission and blessing." "My blessing," Mrs. Patterson huffed. "And what makes you think you are suitable for a refined young woman like Florence Daniels? She comes from a good family, has education and breeding. You are a cowboy, Mr. Lewis. Not to put too fine a point on it, but you are beneath her station." Nathan swallowed his pride and met her eyes steadily. "You are right, madam. By the standards of St. Louis society, I am nobody. But out here in this territory, what matters is character and capability. I own nothing but my horse, my saddle, and the clothes I stand in. But I earn honest wages and save what I can. I do not drink to excess, do not gamble beyond the occasional friendly card game, and I attend church regular as I am able. More importantly, I respect Miss Daniels, admire her, and would spend my life ensuring she never regretted giving me a chance." Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, sharply. "You have 2 months, Mr. Lewis. You may call on Florence twice a week, on Tuesday and Saturday evenings, for no more than 2 hours each visit. You will sit in my parlor where I or my daughter can chaperone. You will not be alone with her except in public places where your interaction can be observed. At the end of 2 months, if you are both still of the same mind, we will discuss the matter further. Do you find these terms acceptable?" "More than acceptable, madam. Thank you." Relief flooded through Nathan so powerfully he felt light-headed. "Do not thank me yet. I will be watching you, Mr. Lewis. Florence is like a daughter to me, and I will not see her hurt by false promises or inconstant affection. You had better mean everything you said to her, or you will answer to me." "I mean every word, Mrs. Patterson. You have my oath on that." "Very well." She turned toward the door, then paused. "She is on the porch around back, gathering herbs from my garden. You have 10 minutes to say goodnight properly, and then I expect you on your horse and heading back to that ranch." Nathan did not need to be told twice. He found Florence in the small garden behind the house. a bundle of herbs in her hand, their fragrance sharp in the cooling night air. She looked up at his approach, and even in the dim light from the house windows, he could see her hopeful expression. "She said yes," Nathan announced, unable to keep the grin from his face. "2 months of properly supervised courtship, and then she will consider us further." "I know. I heard her lecture you from the window." Florence's smile was both amused and tender. "She means well. She has been very kind to me since I arrived. She loves you. That is clear." Nathan stopped an arm's length away, respecting the boundaries that had been set but wishing he could pull Florence close. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I did everything backward and wrong, but I promise to do better from here forward." "You did not do everything wrong." Florence stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Your method was unorthodox, certainly, but your honesty was refreshing. Robert Henderson courted me with calculated precision, every gesture designed to impress my father and maintain his standing in society. You wrote your heart on a chalkboard because you did not know a better way to tell me the truth. There is something valuable in that." "I will find better ways," Nathan promised. "I will write you letters, bring you flowers, whatever courting rituals are expected. I am a quick study when I am properly motivated. I look forward to it." Florence reached out and gently squeezed his hand, the brief contact sending warmth racing up his arm. "Good night, Nathan. I will see you Tuesday evening." "Tuesday evening," he confirmed. "I will be here at 6 o'clock sharp, washed, brushed, and on my best behavior." He forced himself to release her hand and step back before he did something foolish like try to kiss her on their first day of courtship. He walked back around the house to where his horse was tied, painfully aware of Mrs. Patterson watching from a window. The ride back to the Triple Bar Ranch took him through open prairie. The stars spread overhead in a canopy so vast it made his earlier fears seem insignificant. Florence had said yes. Not to marriage, not yet, but to the possibility of it. That was enough for now. That was everything. The ranch house was dark when he arrived except for a light in the main house where his boss, Thomas Crawford, was likely going over accounts. Nathan tended to his horse, brushing the animal down and ensuring he had feed and water before trudging to the bunkhouse where he slept with the other hands. Billy Turner was still awake, reading by lamplight. He looked up as Nathan entered, his eyebrows rising in question. "Well, did you do it?" "I did it. I wrote the proposal on the chalkboard just like I planned." Nathan sank onto his bunk, suddenly exhausted. "And she found it, and I was there, and I somehow managed not to make a complete fool of myself." "And," Billy set aside his book, fully engaged now, "and she said yes." "Well, she said yes to letting me court her properly. Mrs. Patterson has laid down rules and restrictions, but I can call on Florence twice a week starting Tuesday." Billy let out a whoop that woke 2 of the other sleeping cowboys who groaned and hurled profanity in their direction. "You crazy son of a gun, you actually did it." "Martha is going to be thrilled. She has been pestering me for updates on your romantic campaign." "It is only courtship," Nathan cautioned, though he could not keep the smile off his face. "She has not agreed to marry me. Yet. She has not agreed yet, but she will." Any woman who gives a man a chance after he breaks into her schoolhouse and proposes on a chalkboard is already halfway in love with him. Trust me on this. Nathan wanted to believe that, but caution held him back. Florence had said she needed time, and he would give her that. He would court her properly, win her trust and affection, and prove himself worthy. The chalkboard proposal was only the beginning. The first Tuesday evening courtship visit arrived with agonizing slowness. Nathan spent the intervening days working harder than necessary, partly to keep his mind occupied and partly to impress his boss enough to potentially request a raise. If he was going to support a wife, He would need more than a foreman's wages, though those were considerably better than what he had earned as a regular ranch hand. He rode into town early on Tuesday, stopping first at the general store where Mrs. Thornton helped him select a small bouquet of dried wildflowers. Fresh flowers were impossible this late in the season, but Mrs. Thornton had preserved summer blooms and arranged them prettily with ribbon. "These are for Florence Daniels, I am guessing," Mrs. Thornton said with a knowing smile. "The whole town is talking about you too. Quite romantic, the way you have been mooning after her for weeks." "I have not been mooning," Nathan protested, then caught her expression and sighed. "It was that obvious." "Dear boy, you walked into a support beam outside the mercantile because you were watching her instead of where you were going. Everyone knew except possibly Florence herself, and I am not entirely certain about that." Nathan paid for the flowers and fled the store before Mrs. Thornton could embarrass him further. He still had an hour before he was expected at Mrs. Patterson's, so he visited the barber for a shave and trim, then changed into his best shirt and vest at the boarding house where ranch hands could rent rooms by the hour for bathing and changing. At precisely 6 o'clock, he knocked on Mrs. Patterson's door, the bouquet clutched in one slightly sweaty hand. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Patterson's daughter, Emma, a girl of about 17 with her mother's sharp eyes and measuring stare. "Mr. Lewis, please come in. Florence is expecting you in the parlor." She stepped aside to let him enter, then called up the stairs, "Florence, your gentleman caller has arrived." The parlor was a comfortable room with floral wallpaper, several mismatched but clean chairs, and a small bookshelf. Nathan stood awkwardly by the fireplace until Florence appeared in the doorway, and his breath caught in his throat. She wore a dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, her dark hair pinned up in an elegant arrangement that left a few tendrils curling at her neck. She looked beautiful and nervous and pleased all at once, and Nathan found himself grinning like a fool. "Good evening, Miss Daniels." He stepped forward and offered the flowers. "These are for you. They are not fresh, I am afraid, but Mrs. Thornton assured me they are the best available this time of year." "They are lovely, Nathan, thank you." Florence took the bouquet and breathed in their faint fragrance. "Please sit down. Emma will be chaperoning us this evening. I hope that is acceptable." "Of course." Nathan waited until Florence had settled into one chair before taking another across from her. Emma positioned herself near the window with some mending, close enough to observe but far enough to allow conversation. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air thick with awkwardness. Then Florence laughed softly. "This is strange, is it not? We spoke more easily in the schoolhouse, and that was far less proper than this." "I was thinking the same thing." Nathan relaxed slightly. "Perhaps we are both trying too hard to follow the rules and have forgotten how to simply talk to each other. Then let us talk as we did before." Florence set the flowers aside on a small table. "Tell me about your day. What does a ranch foreman do exactly?" Nathan launched into a description of his work, explaining the rhythms of ranch life, the preparation for winter, the daily tasks of managing horses and cattle, and the men who worked with them. Florence listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was truly paying attention. In turn, she told him about her students, the challenges of teaching children of wildly different ages and abilities in one room, the satisfaction of watching them learn and grow. The 2 hours passed far too quickly. Before Nathan knew it, Mrs. Patterson was appearing in the doorway to announce that his time was up. He rose reluctantly, as did Florence. "Thank you for a lovely evening," he said formally, aware of Mrs. Patterson's watchful presence. "I look forward to Saturday." "As do I," Florence replied, and the warmth in her eyes made his heart race. He left the boarding house walking on air, already counting the days until he could see her again. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Tuesday and Saturday evenings, 2 hours each visit, always properly chaperoned. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. Nathan learned that Florence loved poetry but was terrible at singing, that she had a younger brother studying law in Chicago, that she had once broken her arm falling from a tree she had been explicitly told not to climb. Florence learned that Nathan's father had died when he was 14, forcing him to become the man of the family long before he was ready, that he had a fear of deep water stemming from nearly drowning as a child, that his greatest regret was not learning to read better when he had the chance. That last confession came one Saturday evening in October as they sat together, reviewing one of Florence's lesson plans. She had mentioned struggling to engage some of the older boys, particularly in reading, and Nathan had gone quiet. "My reading is not strong," he admitted, feeling his face heat with embarrassment. "I can manage well enough for ranch work, but books, newspapers, anything more complex, I struggle with. My schooling was limited, and after my father died, I had no time for it. That is one of the reasons I admire what you do so much. Education is a gift, and you give it freely to children who might not otherwise receive it." Florence was quiet for a moment, then reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. Emma, who was chaperoning that evening, tactfully did not look up from her book. "Would you like to learn?" Florence asked softly. "I could teach you if you were willing. Not during our courtship visits," she added quickly. "But perhaps Saturday afternoons at the schoolhouse before our evening visit. I am there anyway preparing lessons. It would be no trouble." Nathan looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. The offer was made without pity, only genuine care and practical good sense. "You would do that for me. I am a teacher, Nathan. It is what I do. And besides," she added with a small smile, "it would be nice to have company on Saturday afternoons." So a new pattern added itself to their routine. Saturday afternoons, Nathan would arrive at the schoolhouse at 2 o'clock. Florence would set him up at one of the larger student desks with primers and reading materials, and for 2 hours she would work on her lessons while he practiced his reading, occasionally coming over to help him sound out difficult words or explain concepts. The town noticed, of course. Kingfisher was too small for anything to escape notice for long, but the general consensus seemed to be that it was sweet. The cowboy learning to read better so he could be worthy of his educated sweetheart. Nathan endured the teasing from the ranch hands with good grace, secure in the knowledge that every hard-won word brought him closer to being the man Florence deserved. November brought cold winds sweeping down from Kansas, and the first hints of winter. The school board held their quarterly meeting to review the teacher's performance, and Nathan attended for the first time, sitting in the back of the room with other interested townspeople. He listened as the board members discussed enrollment numbers, supply needs, and building maintenance before finally addressing Florence's performance. Most of the feedback was positive. Test scores were up, attendance was good, and parents reported their children were learning. But then Jacob Richardson, still nursing his grudge from Florence standing up to him, raised an objection. "I still say we are wasting money on some of these children," he said, his voice carrying the slight slur that suggested he had been drinking before the meeting. "Particularly that Miller boy. He is simple. Everyone knows it. No amount of teaching is going to fix that, and Miss Daniels wastes time on him that could be better spent on the children with actual potential." Nathan felt his hands clench into fists. Tommy Miller was not simple. He was cautious and needed more time to grasp concepts, but Florence had been working with him patiently, and the boy was making real progress. Before Nathan could rise to object, Florence stood from her seat at the front of the room, her back straight and her voice clear. "Mr. Richardson, Tommy Miller has improved his reading by 2 grade levels since the beginning of the school year. He struggles with mathematics, yes, but he has a remarkable memory and excels at history and geography. Every child has strengths and challenges, and it is my job as a teacher to help them develop all their abilities, not just the ones that come easily." "That is all well and good," Richardson blustered, "but we pay your salary, and I say you should focus on the children who will actually amount to something. And I say that every child deserves an education, regardless of their background or natural abilities." Florence's voice was firm, her gaze direct. "That is the principle on which public education is founded. If you disagree with that principle, Mr. Richardson, then perhaps you should not be serving on a school board." The room erupted in murmurs. Richardson's face turned red and he opened his mouth to respond, but the board chairman, a reasonable man named Peter Douglas, held up his hand. "Miss Daniels is correct. Our responsibility is to all the children of this district, unless there are other concerns." He glanced around the table, and the other board members shook their heads. "Then, I move we approve Miss Daniels's continued employment and thank her for her dedicated service. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous, even Richardson grudgingly raising his hand under the pressure of public observation. Florence returned to her seat, and Nathan felt such a surge of pride and admiration that he had to restrain himself from applauding. After the meeting ended, Nathan waited outside the building for Florence to emerge. When she did, she looked tired but satisfied. He fell into step beside her as she walked toward Mrs. Patterson's. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "You stood up to him again, even knowing he could cause trouble for you." "He was wrong," Florence said simply, "and someone needed to say so. Tommy Miller deserves the same chance as every other child in that schoolhouse, and I will not abandon him because a drunk bully thinks he is not worth the effort." Nathan stopped walking, causing Florence to stop as well and turn to face him. They were on a quiet stretch of street, no one nearby to observe. "Florence Daniels, I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the day I first saw you in the general store, but now I am certain of it." Florence's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Nathan, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide about us, about the future, I want you to know that I love you. Your courage, your compassion, your absolute refusal to compromise your principles even when it would be easier. I love all of it." For a long moment, Florence simply looked at him, emotions playing across her face too quickly for him to identify. Then she stepped forward and, rising on her toes, pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, then stepped back, her face flushed. "I probably should not have done that. If anyone saw, I do not care if anyone saw," Nathan said, though he was very aware that they were visible from several windows and someone almost certainly had seen. "But you should care. Your reputation matters. Let me walk you home properly." They continued to Mrs. Patterson's, and if the older woman noticed Florence's flushed cheeks and bright eyes, she said nothing. But that night, as Nathan lay in his bunk at the ranch, he replayed those whispered words over and over. She loved him. She was falling in love with him. Everything he had hoped for, dreamed of, was within reach. December arrived with snow and freezing temperatures. The school closed for 2 weeks for the Christmas holiday, and Nathan worried that he would not see Florence during that time. But she surprised him by inviting him, through Mrs. Patterson, to Christmas dinner at the boarding house. He arrived bearing gifts purchased with careful consideration of his limited funds. For Mrs. Patterson, a tin of good tea from the general store. For Emma, hair ribbons. And for Florence, after much agonizing, a leather-bound journal with blank pages, perfect for a teacher who might want to record lessons or personal thoughts. Florence's gift to him was equally thoughtful. A book of poetry by Walt Whitman, with certain passages marked that she thought he might enjoy practicing reading. Inside the cover, she had written in her careful teacher's hand, "To Nathan, who proves every day that learning is a lifelong journey. With my deepest affection, Florence." The dinner was pleasant, with other boarders and guests creating a cheerful atmosphere, but the highlight came after the meal when Mrs. Patterson announced that the young people could take a walk in the snow, provided they stayed within sight of the house and did not remain out longer than half an hour. Nathan and Florence bundled into coats and scarves and stepped out into the winter wonderland that Kingfisher had become. Snow blanketed everything, muffling sound and transforming the rough frontier town into something almost magical. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, their breath creating white clouds in the cold air. Then Nathan gathered his courage and said what he had been planning for weeks. "The 2 months Mrs. Patterson required are almost complete. I know Christmas is not the most original time for this, but I cannot wait any longer." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Florence Daniels, I love you more than I thought it possible to love another person. I want to spend my life with you, supporting your dreams, standing beside you through whatever challenges come. Will you marry me? Properly this time, not just words on a chalkboard, but a true proposal." Florence's eyes filled with tears that caught the light from the windows behind them. "Yes. Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. I cannot imagine my future without you in it. You have become essential to me, and I love you with my whole heart." Nathan wanted to sweep her into his arms to kiss her properly, but they were indeed visible from the house, and he would not compromise her reputation now. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her gloved knuckles with all the reverence of a knight pledging fealty to his queen. "I do not have a ring yet," he admitted, "but I have been saving my wages, and I will buy you the best one I can afford. We will have to wait until spring to marry anyway, to give your family time to travel here if they wish, and to give me time to find us a proper house. I will not ask you to live in a bunkhouse with ranch hands." "I do not care about a fancy ring or a big house," Florence said, squeezing his hand. "All I care about is starting our life together. But yes, spring sounds reasonable. And I suppose I should write to my parents, though I doubt they will come." The sadness in her voice made Nathan's heart ache. "They might surprise you. When they see how happy you are, how successful you have become, they might regret their harsh words. Perhaps." Florence did not sound convinced. "But even if they do not come, I have built a family here. Mrs. Patterson, Emma, the families of my students, they have welcomed me and supported me. And I have you. That is more than enough." They walked back to the house, Nathan reluctant to leave but aware that their half hour was nearly up. At the door, he paused. "I will speak with Mr. Crawford tomorrow about my prospects. He has been pleased with my work, and I hope he might consider a raise or perhaps a position that comes with a house on ranch property. Some of the larger spreads have houses for their foreman and his family." "Whatever you arrange will be fine," Florence assured him. "I have faith in you, Nathan." He left the boarding house that night engaged to be married, his heart so full he felt it might burst. The ride back to the ranch was cold and dark, but Nathan barely noticed, too wrapped up in planning their future. His conversation with Thomas Crawford went better than expected. The ranch owner, a gruff but fair man in his 50s, listened to Nathan's request and nodded thoughtfully. "I have been meaning to discuss this with you," Crawford said, leaning back in his desk chair. "You have done good work here, Nathan. The ranch runs smoother than it has in years, and the other hands respect you. I have been considering expanding our operation, buying some adjacent land and increasing our herd. If I do that, I will need a manager, someone who can handle not just the daily operations but also planning and business decisions. The position would come with a significant raise and the use of the old stone house on the north section. It needs some repair, but it is solid and would be suitable for a family." Nathan's pulse quickened. "I would be honored, Mr. Crawford. I know I still have much to learn about the business side of ranching, but I am willing to work hard and learn whatever is necessary." "I know you are. That is why I am offering." Crawford stood and extended his hand. "Congratulations on your engagement, Nathan. Florence Daniels is a fine woman. She will make you a good wife." "I plan to make her a good husband, sir. I promise you that." The winter months passed in a flurry of planning and preparation. Nathan spent his spare time working on the stone house, repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, and making it habitable. Billy Turner and some of the other hands helped, glad for a project to break the monotony of winter work. Florence continued teaching, but word of the engagement had spread through town, and parents began treating her slightly differently. Some were pleased, seeing it as the natural progression of things. Others worried she might leave teaching once married, though Florence was quick to assure the school board that she intended to continue as long as they would have her, and until children of her own made it impractical. In February, a letter arrived from St. Louis. Florence brought it to the schoolhouse on a Saturday afternoon, her hands trembling as she showed it to Nathan. The handwriting was her mother's. "I am afraid to open it," she admitted. "I wrote them about our engagement weeks ago, and this is the first response. What if they disown me entirely? What if they refuse to acknowledge our marriage? Then they are fools who do not deserve you," Nathan said firmly. "But you will never know unless you open it." Florence broke the seal and unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the page. Nathan watched her expression shift from fear to surprise to something that might have been cautious hope. "They are coming," she said finally. "Mother, father, and my brother Henry. They will arrive in early May, a week before the wedding, and stay at the hotel for the ceremony. Mother writes that while they still believe I am making an unsuitable match, they want to meet you and see for themselves what kind of man I am marrying," she says. Florence's voice broke slightly. "She says she loves me and wants me to be happy, even if she does not understand my choices." Nathan pulled her into his arms, propriety forgotten. Florence clung to him, her face pressed against his chest. "It is more than I hoped for," she whispered. "I thought they might never speak to me again. Of course they will speak to you. You are their daughter and they love you. They may not have shown it well, but love does not disappear simply because we disagree with someone's choices." The stone house came together slowly but surely. Mrs. Patterson donated furniture she no longer needed. Other families in town contributed various items, and Nathan spent his savings on the essentials. By April, the house was simple but comfortable, with a main room, a bedroom, and a small kitchen. It was not fancy, but it would be theirs. Florence spent her evenings after teaching sewing curtains and linens, preparing for their married life. The other women in town held a small party for her, offering advice and gifts, and Florence found herself part of a community in a way she had never experienced in St. Louis society. The first week of May, as promised, Florence's family arrived on the afternoon stage. Nathan stood beside Florence as the coach pulled up, feeling her tension in the rigid way she held herself. The door opened, and a well-dressed couple in their 50s emerged, followed by a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Florence. "Mother, father, Henry." Florence stepped forward, and after a moment's hesitation, her mother embraced her. "Let me look at you, Mrs." Daniels held Florence at arm's length, studying her face. "You look well, happy. I was worried this frontier life would be too harsh for you." "I have found it suits me better than city life ever did," Florence said quietly. Then she turned and held out her hand to Nathan. "This is Nathan Lewis, my fiancé. Nathan, these are my parents, Robert and Margaret Daniels, and my brother Henry." Nathan shook hands with Florence's father and brother, both of whom assessed him with the same direct gaze Florence sometimes employed. Her mother merely nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "We have heard much about you, Mr. Lewis," Robert Daniels said. "Florence's letters speak highly of your character and work ethic." "I hope to prove worthy of her good opinion, sir," Nathan replied. "And of your trust in allowing me to marry your daughter." "We shall see," was all Robert said, but his tone was not unkind. The week before the wedding was stressful for everyone. Florence divided her time between teaching, final preparations, and showing her family around Kingfisher and the surrounding area. Nathan arranged for her father and brother to visit the Triple Bar Ranch, wanting them to understand exactly what kind of life their daughter would be living. Thomas Crawford proved to be an excellent ally, speaking highly of Nathan's abilities and showing the Daniels family the stone house and the operation Nathan would be managing. By the end of the visit, Henry seemed genuinely impressed, and even Robert's stern expression had softened somewhat. "It is not the life we imagined for Florence," Robert admitted to Nathan as they stood on the porch of the main ranch house, looking out over the prairie. "But I can see that you care for her, that you respect her intelligence and independence. That is more than many men would offer, even in our social circle." "I love your daughter more than my own life," Nathan said simply, "and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift she is giving me in agreeing to be my wife." Robert nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing, young man. Take care of her." The wedding took place on a bright May morning at the small church in Kingfisher. Florence wore a simple but elegant dress that Mrs. Patterson and Emma had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Nathan wore his best suit, purchased specially for the occasion, his hands shaking slightly as Florence walked down the aisle on her father's arm. The ceremony was short and traditional. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together in partnership and faith. When Nathan was told he could kiss his bride, he did so gently, reverently, aware of the whole town watching but caring only about the woman in his arms. The reception was held at the church social hall, with food provided by various families and music supplied by local musicians. Nathan danced with his new wife, then with Mrs. Patterson, who cried and told him to take good care of her girl. Florence danced with her father and brother, and Nathan was pleased to see tears in Margaret Daniels's eyes as she watched her daughter laugh and spin. As the sun began to set, Nathan and Florence slipped away from the celebration, riding together on Nathan's horse to the stone house that was now their home. Inside, lanterns had been lit by helpful friends, and the space glowed warm and welcoming. "Are you nervous?" Nathan asked as he helped Florence down from the horse. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly I am happy. This is what I wanted, Nathan, a life with purpose and meaning with a partner who respects me as an equal. You have given me that. You have given me far more. You have given me a future worth building, a reason to become better than I was. I love you, Florence Lewis." "I love you too, Nathan Lewis. Now take me inside and show me our home properly." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, filled with whispered words and gentle discoveries. Nathan had worried about being too rough or clumsy, but Florence guided him with patience and trust. and by morning they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, both satisfied and content. Florence's family stayed another week before returning to St. Louis, and by the time they left, even Margaret Daniels had warmed to Nathan. She pulled him aside before boarding the stage and said quietly, "I see now why Florence chose you. You look at her the way her father looks at me, like she is the most precious thing in your world." That is all any mother wants for her daughter. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Florence continued teaching through the end of the school year, then took a break for the summer to properly settle into married life. She helped Nathan with ranch accounts, her education making her invaluable in managing the business side of the operation. She also started a small garden near the house, growing vegetables and herbs. Nathan threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to make the ranch expansion a success and prove Crawford's faith in him justified. The other hands adapted quickly to Florence's presence, treating her with respect and even affection. She would bring food out to the men during long working days, and more than once Nathan found her bandaging an injury or offering advice on some problem. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch of the stone house, watching the sun set over the prairie. Nathan continued his reading lessons, now working through more complex material, and Florence would read poetry aloud, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. "You miss St. Louis at all?" Nathan asked one evening as they sat watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Florence considered the question, her head resting on his shoulder. "I miss my family sometimes, my brother especially. But no, I do not miss the city or the life I had there. That was not truly living, Nathan. It was performing, playing a role I was expected to fill. Here I can be myself. I can make a real difference in people's lives, and I have you. This is where I belong." "I feel the same. I drifted for so long, never quite belonging anywhere, but you make everywhere feel like home." They kissed as the stars wheeled overhead, the prairie wind whispering through the grass like a benediction. Summer turned to autumn, and Florence prepared to return to teaching. The school board had been accommodating, even improving her contract now that she was an established and beloved member of the community. On the first day of school, Nathan rode with her to the schoolhouse, carrying the supplies she had prepared. "Are you sure you want to continue teaching?" he asked as she unlocked the door. "I am earning enough now that you do not need to work if you would rather focus on the house and other things." "I am sure," Florence said firmly. "Teaching is not just about the money, Nathan. It is part of who I am. These children need me and I need them. When we have children of our own, I may need to stop for a while, but until then I want to continue." Nathan kissed her forehead. "Then you shall. I would never ask you to give up something that matters to you." The school year proceeded smoothly. Tommy Miller, the boy Florence had defended so fiercely, had improved remarkably and was one of her best students now. The Richardson family, grudgingly, admitted their children to the school, though Jacob himself continued to avoid Florence when possible. Winter came again, and with it, a blizzard that trapped Nathan and 3 other hands away from the ranch while checking on cattle in a distant pasture. They took shelter in a line shack, a small cabin maintained for just such emergencies, and waited out the storm for 3 days. Florence, left alone at the stone house with no way to know if Nathan was safe, found those 3 days to be the longest of her life. She kept herself busy with chores and lesson planning, but worry gnawed at her constantly. When Nathan finally returned, half frozen and exhausted, she burst into tears and clung to him. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. "I thought I had lost you. I am sorry. I am so sorry I frightened you." Nathan held her close, his own eyes damp. "But I am safe and I am home. That is what matters." That night, as they lay together in their bed with Nathan finally warmed through, Florence said quietly, "I have something to tell you. I have been waiting for the right moment, but I think after nearly losing you, I cannot wait anymore." Nathan propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her face. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby, Nathan. In the summer, probably July or early August." For a moment, Nathan could not speak, could not breathe. Then joy flooded through him so powerfully he felt dizzy. "A baby, we are going to have a child." "Yes." Florence was smiling through happy tears. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased, Florence, I am overwhelmed, overjoyed, terrified, everything all at once." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You are carrying our child, our baby." "I cannot quite believe it." "Believe it. By this time next year, we will be parents." The pregnancy proceeded normally, though Florence found the combination of teaching and expecting exhausting. She continued through March before finally agreeing to take leave until after the baby arrived. The school board hired a temporary replacement, though the students made it clear they looked forward to Miss Daniels returning, still referring to her by her maiden name as they always had. Florence's mother surprised them both by arriving in June, determined to be present for the birth of her first grandchild. Margaret Daniels proved far more helpful than expected, managing the household and preparing everything needed for a new baby with brisk efficiency. "I was wrong about you," she told Nathan one evening while Florence rested. "You have made my daughter happier than I have ever seen her. You have given her a life of purpose and love, and you clearly adore her. That is all I ever wanted for her, even if I did not recognize it at the time." "Thank you, Mrs. Daniels. That means a great deal. Call me Margaret. We are family now." The baby arrived on a sweltering July afternoon after 12 hours of labor that had Nathan pacing holes in the porch floorboards. When the midwife finally emerged to announce that he had a healthy son and Florence was doing well, Nathan rushed inside to find his wife exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle. "Meet your son," Florence said softly, turning the baby so Nathan could see his face. "I thought we might name him Thomas, after Mr. Crawford, who has been so good to us, with your father's name, James, as his middle name. Thomas James Lewis." Nathan carefully took his son, marveling at how small and perfect he was. "Hello, Thomas. I am your father, and I promise to do everything in my power to give you a good life and be a man you can be proud of." The baby yawned, unimpressed, and both parents laughed through their tears. Margaret stayed for 6 weeks, helping Florence recover and learn the basics of caring for an infant. By the time she left, Florence was managing well, and Nathan had become surprisingly adept at changing diapers and soothing a crying baby in the middle of the night. Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting, and more wonderful than either of them had imagined. Thomas was a healthy, happy child who seemed fascinated by everything around him. Nathan would carry him around the ranch, pointing out horses and cattle and explaining what each job entailed. Florence would read to him from children's books, her teacher's instincts already engaged in his education. Florence returned to teaching that autumn, bringing Thomas with her to the schoolhouse. The older girls took turns helping mind the baby during lessons, and Thomas became something of a mascot for the school. He would sleep in a cradle Florence kept in the corner, and when he woke, one of the students would rock him or walk him around until Florence could feed him. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler. The ranch expansion succeeded beyond expectations, making Nathan a respected figure in the territory's cattle industry. Florence continued teaching, her reputation as an excellent educator spreading to neighboring towns. When Thomas was 3, Florence became pregnant again. This time, She knew what to expect and managed more easily, teaching until a month before the baby arrived. Their second child was a girl, born in the spring of 1897. They named her Sarah Rose, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's steady temperament. "Our family feels complete," Florence said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas chase fireflies while Sarah slept in her mother's arms. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Nathan. Sometimes I wake up afraid it is all a dream. It is real. We are real. This life we built together is real." Nathan pulled her close, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "And it all started because I was foolish enough to climb through a window and write a proposal on your chalkboard." Florence laughed softly. "That was the best piece of foolishness I have ever encountered. I am glad you were too impatient to court me properly first." "I did court you properly eventually." "You did. But that first bold gesture showed me who you really were beneath the nervousness and propriety. It showed me a man brave enough to declare his intentions, romantic enough to put his heart out there for me to accept or reject. I fell in love with that man on that chalkboard message." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the prairie sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, the remnants of dinner waited to be cleared. Tomorrow, there would be cattle to manage and lessons to teach and diapers to change. But right now, in this moment, everything was perfect. Thomas ran up to the porch, his small face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Mama, I caught one. I caught a firefly." He held out his cupped hands, and through the gaps in his fingers, a soft light pulsed. "That is wonderful, son," Nathan said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Now let it go so it can go home to its family." Thomas carefully opened his hands, and the firefly crawled to his palm, then took flight, its light blinking as it disappeared into the darkening evening. "Will you tell me the story again?" Thomas asked, climbing onto the porch step. "About how you asked Mama to marry you." Nathan and Florence exchanged an amused glance. Thomas never tired of hearing this particular story. "Well," Nathan began, settling back in his chair, "your mama was a teacher at the schoolhouse in town, and I was just a cowboy who had fallen head over heels in love with her. But I did not know how to tell her, so I did something very foolish." As Nathan recounted the story, Florence listened with a smile, remembering that September afternoon when she had returned to find those 4 words on her chalkboard. She had been terrified and thrilled, uncertain and hopeful, all at once. She had not known then where that moment would lead, but looking at her life now, her husband and children, their home and community, she knew she would not change a single thing. Life in the Oklahoma Territory could be harsh. Droughts came and threatened the cattle. Winters were brutal, the isolation could be difficult. But Florence had found something here she had never known in St. Louis: purpose, love, and the freedom to be truly herself. Thomas eventually grew tired and went inside to prepare for bed, and Florence followed with Sarah. Nathan remained on the porch for a few more minutes, looking out over the land he managed, the house he had built, the life he had created. He thought about that young man who had been so desperately in love. He had climbed through a window to write a proposal. That man had been terrified and hopeful, certain he would be rejected but unable to stop himself from trying. If he could go back and tell that younger self how it would all turn out, Nathan was not sure he would believe it. Inside, Florence was tucking Thomas into bed, her soft voice carrying through the open window as she answered his endless questions about stars and fireflies, and whether horses dreamed. Nathan smiled and headed inside to join his family, to kiss his children goodnight and hold his wife as they fell asleep together. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas proved to be excellent with horses, spending every spare moment at the stables learning from the ranch hands. Sarah developed her mother's love of learning and could often be found with her nose in a book, reading far beyond her years. Florence eventually reduced her teaching to part-time, training a younger woman to take over most of her duties while she focused more on her own children's education and helping Nathan with the increasingly complex ranch business. But she never entirely gave it up, continuing to tutor students who needed extra help and serving on the school board to ensure educational standards remained high. Nathan's reputation grew beyond Kingfisher. He was invited to speak at cattle associations, to consult on ranch management, to serve on territorial boards and committees. But he never forgot his roots, never became too important to spend time with his children or help a neighbor in need. In 1899, when Thomas was 6 and Sarah 3, the family made their first trip to St. Louis to visit Florence's parents. The journey by train was exciting for the children, and seeing their mother's childhood home gave them new perspective on her life before Oklahoma. Robert and Margaret Daniels doted on their grandchildren, and even the crowded city could not completely overwhelm the kids' enthusiasm. But when it came time to return to Oklahoma, both Thomas and Sarah were ready to go home, and Florence felt the same. St. Louis was where she had come from, but Oklahoma was where she belonged. The turn of the century found the Lewis family well established and happy. The ranch continued to prosper. Florence's teaching legacy had shaped an entire generation of Kingfisher children. Their marriage, which had begun with chalk words on a blackboard, had deepened into a partnership built on trust, respect, and enduring love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch the children and took Florence back to the schoolhouse, which was empty for the summer. Inside, he led her to the chalkboard and handed her a piece of chalk. "You remember what I wrote here?" he asked. "Of course. I will never forget it." Florence's eyes were bright with emotion. "Write your answer, the answer you have given me every day for 10 years, but write it out so I can see it." Florence turned to the chalkboard and wrote in her clear, precise teacher's hand. "Yes. Today, tomorrow, and always yes." Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they were visible through the windows or that half the town might see. "I love you, Florence Lewis. Thank you for saying yes 10 years ago. Thank you for saying yes every day since." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Florence replied. "You showed me that a bold declaration written in chalk could be the beginning of everything I never knew I wanted. Thank you for being brave enough to write those words, Nathan. Thank you for choosing me." They stood together in the schoolhouse where it had all begun, holding each other as afternoon light streamed through the windows, and both silently thanked whatever fate or fortune had brought them together. The years ahead would bring more children, more challenges, more joys and sorrows as all lives do. But the foundation built on that September day in 1891, when a cowboy gathered his courage and wrote his heart on a chalkboard, remained strong. Oklahoma Territory would eventually become a state. Kingfisher would grow and change. But the story of the teacher and the cowboy, of the chalkboard proposal that became a 10-year love story and then a lifetime, would be told and retold, becoming part of the town's folklore. And at the center of it all were Nathan and Florence Lewis, who had built a life together based on courage, love, and the willingness to take a chance on something extraordinary. They grew old together on that Oklahoma prairie, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, never losing the spark that had ignited when their eyes met across a schoolhouse, and he had dared to dream she might say yes. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the grand gestures or the perfect words, but the daily choice to love, to commit, to build something lasting together. The chalkboard message had faded within days, but the love it represented endured, a testament to the power of honest hearts and brave declarations, and the magic that happens when two people find each other against all odds in the wild, beautiful frontier of the American West.